Hi, boys. So today we're going to be learning about the ELA concept of plot. The Common Core standard that aligns with plot is RL 4.3. RL stands for reading literature. So we're going to be focused on those literary and fiction texts that tell a story. The greatest four in the standard is number 3. So the standard reads, describe in depth a character, setting, or event in a story or drama, drawing on specific details in the text. Examples given, a character's thoughts, words, or actions. We're going to be focused on this portion specifically of the standard. We're going to be focused on going really in depth of the story from the beginning to the end. Now you might be asking yourself, what exactly is plot? Well, let's define it further. Plot is the action of the story. It drives the story. You'll hear me say that often in class. All stories have a plot, and some are better than others, but all stories have a plot, and no plot equals no story. And there are a total of 5 standard elements of plot. So when you think of a plot diagram, I want you to visualize a mountain because that's exactly what a plot diagram looks like. However, when you are in class, you'll be using something specifically like this. Now it looks a little sideways, but there's a perfect reason for that, okay? So we're going to go over the components right now. You'll notice that there are 6 markers here on the diagram. However, there are 5 elements. Reason being, one of them is included in the other. So, for example, this starting part of the plot diagram is exposition or introduction. Those can be used interchangeably. This is where you are told the background information of a story, you're given the setting, you're introduced to a variety of characters, you're also given the conflict or you're introduced to a conflict. It's also called the inciting moment. However, the conflict and inciting moment are a part of the exposition. Then our next component are rising actions. You'll notice that's plural. You'll also notice that this portion of the diagram is a whole lot longer than the rest of the diagram. There's reason for that because there are a lot of rising actions in majority of stories. It's usually the bulk of your story or movie. The next component is climax. And a climax is also known as the turning point. It's also the highest point of our story. It's where the story gets really intense, and it's where our main character has to come face to face with their conflict or their problem. We have our falling actions. Again, those are plural as well, but you'll notice that this component of the diagram is a little bit smaller, and that's because the story is starting to wrap up and conclude, which leads us to our resolution, where the story is resolved. Now, today we're going to be learning about plot through a favorite movie of mine. We're going to be learning about it through The Lion King. And as we look at The Lion King, we're going to be again focusing on those components of the plot diagram, the exposition and introduction, where we are given background information, characters, setting, and the conflict. We're going to talk a lot about the rising actions as well. We're going to mention that climax, the falling actions, which lead then to the resolution. So, again, to review, the exposition is the beginning of the story. It's also known as the introduction. The characters and setting are introduced, and it gives us a lot of background information. And you are also introduced to the conflict or problem, and it is established. Now, in The Lion King, the beginning of the story, we start at Pride Rock. They're having the presentation of Simba, and everyone in the Pride Lands should be there. There's a group that's not, the hyenas, and then there's also one other individual that should have been there, and he's not, which he happens to be our problem as well. This is Scar. And now Scar has a lot of internal problems, but his problem that arises within this plot diagram is the problem he has with Simba, because he has a problem with Simba because Simba took his spot in line. No, not in line to lunch, his spot in line to the throne, to the kingdom. And so Scar used to be next in line, but he no longer is because of Simba. So there's a lot of animosity there. Now we have our rising actions. Now there's a lot, but first let's review what rising actions are. The story becomes a little bit more complicated, and it always centers around the problems occurring around the main character. And within the rising actions, you will notice that the main character evolves. They kind of like grow up through the rising actions. So the first rising action we have as an example is when Simba and Nala go to the elephant graveyard, where they get introduced themselves to a group of individuals known as hyenas who play a big role in the rest of the story. And then another rising action is Scar concocts this immaculate plan to try and get rid of Mufasa and essentially Simba. He coerces Simba to go into this ravine and he causes this stampede, which leads to Mufasa trying to go and save him. However, it ends up being Mufasa's demise because he ends up dying at the hands or claws of Scar. Now here, this is where Scar is very manipulative. He manipulates young Simba to believe that it is his fault. So Simba flees and he doesn't come back to the Pride Lands because he truly believes that it's his fault. Along the way, Simba meets Pumbaa and Timon, and he pretty much grows up with them. You can notice this by the fact that he's gotten much larger in this image. And then somewhere down the road, Nala is going looking for food because the Pride Lands are emaciated at this point, and she runs across Simba, who she thought was dead. And throughout this process, you're starting to see Simba evolve, and he starts to realize maybe, just maybe, it wasn't my fault that Mufasa died. And so then we're going along the mountain where we're reaching that, we're getting a little bit higher, it's building our anticipation. We're about to reach that turning point where our story starts to change. So we get to that climax, and that's the turning point of the story. It's the highest point of interest. And the character has to come face to face with the conflict. And the conflict again here is Scar. So Simba and Scar have a massive fight. And Simba ends up defeating Scar. In the following actions, the characters begin to try and solve the problem and/or conflict, and the events begin to wrap up. Unfortunately for Scar, during that fight with Simba, he decided to kind of put off the hyenas, and they're very vengeful, and they're also quite hungry. And the last part of this scene, it shows Simba taking his place on Pride Rock as king. So again, those events, they're beginning to wrap up, and we're getting closer to our happy ending with our resolution. This is the end of the story, and the conflict is resolved. As you can see here, Simba and Nala, and then there's Rafiki again with another presentation, and it's all gone around the circle of life. So now, every question you see about plot is not going to refer to The Lion King, unfortunately. That'd be pretty great if so. So you might get a question that asks you, how do paragraphs 8 through 10 develop the plot of the story? If you don't know the plot of the story, it's going to be very, very difficult to answer that question. What is the turning point of the story? Again, the turning point is that highest point of intensity throughout the story, also known as the climax. What is the conflict or problem the character faced? That is introduced usually within the exposition or the introduction of the story. How is the story resolved? That's the ending of the story, and that's the resolution. What events led to the climax or turning point of the story? And what events led to the resolution of the story? So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about plot, and I will see you next time.